everyone. So today we are starting with the Indian Council Act 1892. In previous videos, we have discussed about the Indian Council Government of India Act 1858 and Act of 1861, in which we have discussed about its reason for coming of those acts, what were the provisions of those acts, and what were the effects on the Indians and the British governments of those acts, and what were the ultimate defects which led to the further bringing of the next acts. Like after 1858, the act of 1860 came, and what was the defects in 1861, that the act of 1892 was to be bring. So let's see what was the Indian Council Act of 1892. Sorry, we are not actually going to see the meaning of this act of 1892. We will sorry, we will firstly see the factors responsible for the passing of Indian Council Act of 1892. So number one is the growing Indian political awareness. So as we have seen that Britishers have basically created institutes and universities and also Western schools in India to promote educations, and it was the step was taken after the Queen's proclamations and Act of 1861. So with this, also one thing was that Indians were allowed to go to Britain or abroad, basically light Indians, for to earn and basically learn. So take education in different means fields. So with growing up by the late 19th century, Indians became more aware of their rights and started demanding political representations, and also Western education played a crucial role, as I have told you, in shaping the nationalist ideas among Indians, because when Indians studies about their histories, about the and compare the political situation of the Britain with Indian situation, so they started demanding that Indians should be given rights to run their own nations, and also the Indians are capable enough to govern themselves. So these type of nationalist feelings, Indians feeling started rising up, and Indian leaders influenced by democratic principles in Britain. As I said, you from the Britain principles, the Indians got influenced, and they demanded reforms in the legislative process, because the legislative process of Britain was very much that of democratic as compared to that of the Indian. And so after reading or after getting educated or after getting aware of those things, Indians, elite Indians or basically educated Indians, started demanding for the more rights. Number two was pressure from the Indian National Congress. So basically INC was formed in 1885, and they continuously pressured the Britain government, or basically British governments, to for the reforms and the rights, and also they kept demanding for the increased participation of the Indians in the councils, and for the budgets, voice in the budgets and decision making power. So ultimately this type of pressure played a ultimate role to bring the Indian Council Act of 1892. So let's see what is written. The Indian National Congress was founded in 1885 and became the main platform for political demands. Also, in its early sessions, the INC demanded representation in legislative councils, especially for discussing budget. As I have said you earlier, in the Act of 1861, there was no right of to legislative councils to discuss the budgets or power, basically ask questions about the governance. So basically after the Act of 1892, these powers were given. We will see it later, but were the powers given to the legislative councils and other members to the India in the after coming of the Indian Council Act of 1892. But let's see what were the type of the process that Indian National Congress created. So basically, in early stage, INC demanded representation in Legislative Council, and especially for the discussing budgets and public policies. Uh, Also, the 1889 Indian National Congress session, presided over by Sir William Wedderburn, strongly urged the British government to expand the role of Indians in the governance, because he believed, Sir William Wedderburn believed that Indians should be allowed to govern themselves. They they have the capability to govern themselves. So if completely the governance cannot be given to the Indians, then they should must British Crown must increase the participation of Indians in the governance. So basically, it was in 1889 session this thing was passed. Third factor responsible for the passing of the Indian Council Act of 1892 was the limitation of Indian Council Act of 1861, in which we have seen that though the Legislative Council was created by Act of 1861, but gave Indians no real powers, as they were just like advisory members type of things, and their decisions were not taken into a considerable format. They were just like a type of illusion things that were given to the Indians, so to calm the uh, basically defects of 1858. So the council were mainly advisory, as I've said. They just were acting as advisory, with no power to question the executive and or amend laws. They had no power even to questions and amend laws. In later, we will see that though the Act of 1892 given the power to ask a question, but it required a 6 days or 7 days, I think, prior notice for the asking question, and the main leader of the Legislative Council can decline the question without giving any basically any reasons, proper reason, any explanations. So basically, it was not enough. The Act of 1892 what provided was not enough, but again, in progressive step, after 1861, it was a good heavy containing steps. So it increased the participation of India. We will see it later. Let's see what was the third thing. Indian leaders realized that mere participation without legislative authority was meaningless. Mere means very less participation without legislative authority. Legislative authority means law making authority, means the power to make law. So Indians thought that participations in this type of councils without the power to make law was meaningless, leading to demand for, it leads to the demand for more powers by the Indians. Fourth factor responsible for the passing of the Indian Council Act of 1892 is British strategy of political inclusion. So basically, British strategy of political inclusion is that the British wants to basically, instead of granting full democratic rights, Britishers then believes that a gradual power sharing will be that will play a better role. So let's see what's written. The British followed a policy of slow and controlled political reforms to prevent mass resistance. So basically, Britishers wanted gradual upgradations, so that sudden change type of feelings do not arise in Indians or in their colonies. So same principles were applied to the Indians, that gradual reforms uh, will be taken up, and instead of granting full democratic rights, they have opted for incremental reforms like limited elections. So in this Indian Council Act of 1892, limited elections were given. So that's what it is talking about, but the elections was indirect. We will see it later, so right now don't think about it. We'll see it later. So the British hope that a small political concessions, this concession is basically relief type of. So basically they thought that after giving a small concessions, they would satisfy Indian elites and maintain British dominance. So for the reason, the Indian Council Act of 1892 was passed. Also, the economic grievance and budget discussion was another issue which led this act to be passed. So Indians were highly dissatisfied with British economic policies, which led to poverty, famine, and resources exploitation. Um, so basically, you could see that you from thousands of hundred of thousands of Indians died after I think after the passing of the 1892 Act. It was, I'm not clear about it, but famine and poverty was the another reason, because it shows that the distribution of resources by the that's British is not appropriate. That's why this type of things is happening. And the INC demanded the right to discuss and question financial matters, particularly tax places and public spending. So as I have said, they wanted rights, and British officials saw this as a way to create ease tension. Again, say it this what you have seen in the passing of Act of 1858 and again in 1861. So basically, all the acts which was passed by the Britishers were just to ease the tensions which were gradually increasing on in Indians. So number sixth reason for the passing of the Act of 1892 was the need for administrative efficiency. So the British government realized that excluding Indians from the governance made administration difficult. And by allowing a few Indians into the councils, they could ensure better local governance without handing over power. So we have seen that though the Indians were included in the councils and various other processes and government services, but the real power lies in the hands of the Britishers. Like we have seen in army, the highest of his positions were reserved for the Europeans only, basically Britishers only. So this type of by practicing this type of things, they just ensured that they could get the basically supports of the Indians or supports from the Indian elites. So this would also reduce. They thought that this would reduce criticism rule, and Indian would feel their voices were being heard, even if they had no real. Again, they had no real power, but Britishers thought that giving this type of little concessions, like increasing members in the councils and giving little say in the asking questions and budgets representation, it will make Indian feels like. Comfortable, and they will feel like they are being heard. They have the voice in the legislation. So now let's see the seventh factor, which was the influence of the British liberalization and political thought. So basically, in Britain, liberal political thought idea was gaining popularity, advocating gradual reforms in the colonies. So this played a very you can say dominant effect, because liberals wanted to share some powers with the Indians. But though their thinking was that by giving some powers, they would again the thing was that they wanted to satisfy Indians and ease the tensions and all. So, but these thoughts played important roles. Some British officers and politicians, such as Lord Ripon and Viceroy of India, forms India from 1884 to 1880 to 84, who was Lord Ripon, supported limited Indian participation in the governance. This influenced the decision to expand legislative council and introduce elected members, though in a controlled manner. Again, controlling, but basically limiting the powers was one of the important things that Britishers rule does, so to prevent the basically Indians increment or Indians growth type of. So one another phase which played an important role was Lord Dufferin. Lord Dufferin, who was the Governor General of India at that time, took keen interest in the reforms of the councils. He looked upon the desire of educated Indians to take part uh, in the management. He repeatedly proposed the Lord Cross that at that time Lord Cross was the Secretary of the State. So he repeatedly proposed him for the introduction of the elective elements in the legislature. And though after his basically ending of his tenure of service, Lord Dufferin service, this act was passed. So, but you can say that this type of proposition was like increasing the chances of the reforms in the government. So let's stop here. In next video, we will see the main provision of the Act of 1892. So for now, let's stop.